Commander Vexel's massive form filled the reinforced interrogation chair, its thick chitinous armor plates catching the harsh overhead lights. Each plate told a story of violence, deep gouges from plasma rifles, burn marks from energy weapons, and one particularly nasty scar that ran from his left shoulder down to his primary arm, where a human blade had found its mark years ago. His 4 compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, moved independently as they scanned the sterile military debriefing room. Across the metal table sat military historian Quindor, her slender frame dwarfed by the alien commander's bulk. 6 delicate fingers adjusted the recording device between them, soft blue light indicating it was capturing every word, every pause, every nervous click of Vexel's mandibles. She had interviewed hundreds of veterans from the human wars, but none had requested a closed session like this. None had seemed so... broken. The room itself spoke of the paranoia that had gripped the galactic defense corps. Since humanity's emergence, reinforced walls, no windows, electromagnetic shielding to prevent any transmissions from leaving the facility. Even the air recycling system had been modified after reports that humans could somehow detect standard atmospheric compositions and use them to track alien positions. Commander, your service record shows 43 major engagements across 7 star systems, Quinder began, her voice soft and professional. But your request specifically mentions the Kepler incident? Why start there? Vexel's breathing. Apparatus wheezed as he shifted his weight. The chair groaned under his half-ton mass. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much, because Kepler is where it all began, where we first learned what humans really are. Tell me about the humans, Quinder said, her voice barely above a whisper. Had learned that veterans responded better to gentle prompting than direct interrogation. Vexel's 4 eyes dimmed, the bioluminescent organs behind them flickering like dying stars. The humans... they were not what we expected. Nothing in our xenobiology databases prepared us for them. Nothing in our military doctrine accounted for their... nature. He paused, his secondary arms gesturing vaguely at the scars covering his torso. The first encounter was at Kepler Mining Station. Routine operation, really. A human mining colony had stopped responding to Galactic Authority communications. Standard protocol was to establish orbital blockade, cut off supply lines, wait for surrender. They'd done it thousands of times before with other species. His mandibles clicked nervously, a sound like knives scraping against stone. The colony was small, it'd be 3,000 humans working the asteroid belt. Our intelligence suggested they were just miners, civilians with basic equipment and no military training. We thought we were dealing with another rebellious colony, standard siege protocols, standard outcomes. Blockade for a few days, they run out of food and power, they surrender. We process them through the legal system. The historian leaned forward, noting how the commander's voice had begun to shake. But something went wrong. Wrong. Vexel's laugh was bitter, a sound like grinding metal. Everything went wrong from the moment we dropped out of hyperspace. Our sensors detected the mining station immediately, a converted asteroid about 12 kilometers across, honeycombed with tunnels and habitation domes. Standard civilian installation, but as we were setting up our blockade formation, something appeared on our long-range scanners. He gestured with one of his primary arms, the movement sharp and agitated. The vessel that broke through your blockade? Quindor prompted. Broke through? Vexel's compound eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. No, they didn't break through. That would have made sense. That would have been normal military procedure. Instead, they came straight at us, broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously. It's not encrypted military communications, not desperate. Pleas for mercy. Just ... talking. The commander's voice grew distant, as if he were seeing the events again. The voice was calm, almost pleasant. Professional, like someone calling to arrange a business meeting. He said his name was Deho, and he was coming to collect his people, just like that. No threats, no demands, no negotiations. It's just a simple statement of intent. Quinder's recording device captured the slight tremor in the veteran's voice. "One ship against your entire fleet?" "One ship," Vexel confirmed, his voice growing distant and hollow. "A modified cargo hauler, maybe 200 meters long. Our battle group consisted of 3 heavy cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 47 fighter craft. We had enough firepower to level a small moon. This human ship, it looked like something. Held together with metal patches and prayer." The commander's breathing grew labored as he continued, but there was something about the way it moved. No evasive maneuvers, no attempt to flee or hide. It came at us in a straight line, engines at full burn, like it had somewhere important to be, and we were just an inconvenience in its path. Our fleet commander, Admiral Zakinoth, tried to establish communication. Standard procedure was to order them to heave to and prepare for boarding. But before he could finish his transmission, this human Deho interrupted him.
Al, the human,
said, "I appreciate that you have a job to do, but so do I. My people down there have been waiting for me. I don't like to keep family waiting." Vexel's secondary arms began trembling. Family, that's what he called them. Not citizens, not fellow colonists. Family, and the way he said it. There was something in his voice that made even our most experienced officers nervous. The historian made a note, then looked up. Happened next. Admiral Zakenoth ordered the human ship to stop. When it didn't comply, he authorized warning shots. Standard procedure: fire across their bow, demonstrate our superior firepower, force them to surrender. The commander's mandibles clicked rapidly now, a sign of extreme agitation. But what emerged from that ship when our weapons started firing? What those humans did to us? It changed everything we thought we knew about warfare. Vexel's razor-sharp claws scraped against the reinforced metal table, leaving deep grooves in the surface as he continued his account. The sound made Quinder's skin crawl, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact with the massive alien commander. His 4 compound eyes had begun to glow brighter, sign of stress among his species that she had learned to recognize during her years of interviewing. War veterans. Deho's ship was a modified cargo hauler, Vexel said, his voice taking on the mechanical tone of someone reciting facts to avoid emotional breakdown. Primitive by our standards, crude fusion drives, basic hull plating, navigation systems that belonged in a museum. But when our deep scan sensors analyzed the vessel's composition, we found something deeply disturbing. The commander paused to activate his breathing apparatus, the mechanical wheeze filling the silence. The entire hull was lined with explosive charges, not military-grade ordnance, mind you. These were mining charges, industrial explosives meant for breaking apart asteroids. But there were hundreds of them, wired together in a pattern our weapons specialists had never seen before. They had turned their own vessel into a massive bomb. Quinder's writing implement paused mid-sentence. "They intended to ram your ships." "That's what we thought initially," Vexel replied, his secondary arms gesturing frantically. Admiral Zakenoth ordered all ships to maximum dispersion, expecting a suicide run. Our tactical computers calculated the blast radius, estimated casualty. Reports prepared countermeasures. But humans, ... Humans don't think like we do. The alien's breathing grew more labored as he relived the memory. Instead of ramming us, Deho's ship came to a complete stop just outside our weapons range. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing happened. Our sensors showed the ship was powering down its engines, going completely dark. Then the cargo bay doors opened, and worse than ramming, they launched themselves at the station in individual pods. Dozens of them, scattered across space like seeds in the wind. These weren't military drop pods or assault vehicles. They were mining equipment or haulers, personal transport pods, even modified spacesuits with improvised propulsion systems. Some were barely held together with welding patches and hope. Vexel's claws continued their nervous scraping. Fighter squadrons moved to intercept immediately. Standard procedure against boarding pods: destroy them before they reach their target. But as our pilots were locking onto the first wave of pods, something came through on the general communication channel. The commander's voice shifted, taking on a different tone as he quoted the human's words. A human named Kyung-Soo spoke over the comm. His voice was calm, almost conversational. He said, "We're not here to fight you. We're here to get our families. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The audacity of it stunned our pilots for a few seconds. Here they were, launching an unauthorized boarding action against a military blockade. And they were asking us not to make things difficult. Admiral Zakanoth ordered immediate engagement. Destroy all hostile pods. Show no mercy. Vexel's breathing apparatus wheezed loudly as his stress levels spiked. We opened fire, of course. Standard procedure when dealing with hostile boarders. Our plasma cannons lit up the void between us and the mining station. Energy bolts that could vaporize a small spacecraft filled the space around those primitive human pods. The historian leaned forward, sensing the critical moment in the story, and the humans. "They didn't try to evade," Vexel whispered, his 4 eyes dimming with remembered horror. "Every other species in the galaxy, when faced with military-grade weapons fire, they scatter, they run evasive patterns, they try to minimize casualties. These humans flew straight through our weapons fire like it was a minor inconvenience, watched through the tactical display as their crude life support. Systems were shredded by our plasma bolts, saw their makeshift pods torn apart by energy weapons designed to destroy armored military vehicles. Their suits were breached, their oxygen venting into space, their primitive electronics fried by electromagnetic pulses. By every law of physics. In biology, they should have died within seconds. The commander's secondary arms began trembling uncontrollably. But they didn't. They kept coming. A female named Hyjin. I remember her name because she kept talking over the comm channel, giving status reports to the other humans. She had half her environmental suit torn away by a direct plasma hit. I could see through our long-range cameras. As her atmosphere vented into space, her body exposed to the vacuum. Vexel's voice cracked. Do you know what she did? She sealed the breach with her bare hands. Not with emergency patches or repair foam, with her actual hands. Pressed them against the torn metal and somehow kept enough pressure to maintain life support. Then she continued toward the station like nothing had happened. Another one, Minho, had his entire propulsion system destroyed by our fighters. His pod was dead in space, drifting away from the station. Our pilots assumed he was finished, moved on to other targets. But this human, he started throwing things. Throwing things? His tools? Pieces of his destroyed pod? Everything that wasn't bolted down. He was using the momentum from throwing objects to change his trajectory, literally pushing himself through space toward the mining station. When he ran out of loose equipment, he started dismantling parts of his own life support system and throwing those. The alien commander stood up suddenly, his massive frame towering over the table. He began pacing the small room, his footsteps shaking the floor. Our tactical officers were watching this through their scopes, calling out his position. Is still mobile, attempting to reach the station hull, but there was something in their voices: confusion, maybe even fear. This wasn't how battles were supposed to work. Minho reached the station hull with maybe 5 minutes of life support remaining. Our sensors detected him making contact with the outer airlock systems. He was still alive, still functional, still a threat. And the worst part, Vexel's voice dropped to a whisper. What? The worst part was that we could hear them talking to each other. Humans had maintained communication throughout the entire assault. Not military chatter or tactical updates. They were encouraging each other, sharing jokes, asking about each other's families. Hyjin was telling Minho about her daughter's birthday party. Another human, Sang-wook, was describing what he planned to cook for dinner once they got everyone home safely. The commander stopped pacing and turned to face the historian directly. They weren't soldiers, Quinder. No, they were just people. Ordinary civilians who worked in the mines. Maintained the equipment, raised their children in that asteroid colony. But they were flying through military weapons fire and treating it like a difficult day at work. And when they reached the station, Vexel's for eyes began glowing brighter, the bioluminescent organs behind them pulsing with agitation. When we realized our tactical assessment had been completely wrong, we thought we were dealing with a desperate rescue mission, civilians trying to evacuate their families before we could establish full control of the colony. But they weren't evacuating anyone. They were coming home to fight. Once they reached Kepler Station, everything changed, Vextel continued, his scarred hide rippling with remembered fear. The thick chitinous plates covering his torso began shifting color from their normal dark green to a sickly yellow. An involuntary stress response that he couldn't control even decades later. Our occupation forces inside the station had been there for 3 days already. Standard procedure: secure all critical systems, establish patrol routes, control the population, 2 full battalions of our best troops, over 1,400 soldiers. The massive alien commander moved to the room's single viewport, staring out at the stars beyond. At first, everything seemed normal after the humans made their boarding. Our sensors detected them entering through the mining airlocks on levels 7 and 12. Small groups, maybe 5 or 6 humans each. Our tactical teams moved to intercept, expecting quick surrender once the civilians realized they were outnumbered and outgunned. Quinder adjusted her recording device, noting how the commander's voice had taken on a haunted quality. But they didn't surrender. They vanished, Vexel said simply. Our troops reached the airlocks within minutes of the humans' entry. Found nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no signs of struggle. It was like they had just melted into the station itself. The aliens' 4 eyes began moving independently, scanning the room as if expecting an attack. Then the sound started. Our forces reported strange noises echoing through the ventilation systems, cutting tools, welding equipment, the scrape of metal on metal. At first, our commanders assumed it was just the station's automated systems. Mining operations often continue even during military occupation, but it wasn't automated equipment. No, the humans weren't using weapons, they were using mining gear. Industrial plasma cutters designed for breaking apart asteroid rock. Heavy-duty welding torches meant for ship repair. Drilling equipment that could punch through reinforced hull plating. They had turned an entire mining colony into their personal armory. Vextel S-claws scraped against the viewport as his agitation increased. Our troops started finding evidence of their presence everywhere. Security cameras cut from their mounting brackets, not destroyed, just carefully removed. Ventilation grates that had been opened and sealed again. Food supplies that showed signs of organized redistribution. They were living in the walls, moving through maintenance tunnels we didn't even know existed. The historian's writing implement paused as she processed this information. They knew the station better than your forces. They had built it, Vexel replied, his voice heavy with realization. Every corridor, every access panel, every hidden maintenance shaft, the humans had designed and constructed every meter of that facility. We were trying to control a structure that they understood better than their own bodies. Then came the first direct contact. The commander's breathing apparatus wheezed as stress hormones flooded his system. A human named Sung Min contacted our forces directly through the station's internal communication system. Through any channel we were monitoring. He had somehow accessed the mining shift coordination network and was broadcasting on the frequency used for daily work assignments. Quinder leaned forward, sensing the critical moment. What did he say? His voice was completely calm, professional even, like a supervisor giving instructions to his work crew. He said they had 24 hours to evacuate all non-essential personnel from the station. Said it wasn't a threat, just a practical timeline for everyone's safety. When our commander, Colonel Victor, refused and demanded immediate surrender, Sung Min's response was unsettling. The alien's mandibles began clicking rapidly, the sound like castanets in the quiet room. What did he say? He said, "We know there are 1,400 of you aboard this station. We know your patrol routes, your shift changes, your supply schedules. We've been watching you for 3 days. This is your only warning." Vextel turned from the viewport, his 4 compound eyes focusing on the historian with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. How could they know our operational details? We had maintained communication silence, followed all security protocols. Our intelligence officers had swept the station for surveillance equipment and found nothing. But somehow, these civilians had mapped our entire operation. Colonel Victor demanded proof. Sung Min responded by listing the exact positions of our 3 command posts, the rotation schedule for our perimeter guards, and the contents of our last supply drop, information that should have been classified at the highest levels. Then, he mentioned something that made our intelligence officers go pale, which was, he knew about the backup communication array we had hidden in the station's lower levels, the emergency transmitter that even most of our own troops didn't know existed. Songmin told us exactly where it was located and suggested we might want to use it to call for reinforcements while there was still time. The commander's scarred hide began rippling more violently. The first attack came 12 hours later, right at shift change. Our troops were rotating positions, a vulnerable moment that lasted maybe 90 seconds. That's when we learned these humans had been studying us like laboratory specimens. A human named Yunji had positioned herself in the ventilation system directly above our primary command center. Our sensors hadn't detected her because she was using some kind of reflective material to mask. Her heat signature probably salvaged. From the mining equipment, she waited until the exact moment when our day shift was handing over to night shift, then dropped flashbang devices through the air vents. Quinder's recorder captured the tremor in the veteran's voice. Flashbangs are military equipment. How did civilians get access to them? They made them, Vextel said, with something approaching admiration. Mining operations use-controlled. Explosions all the time. These humans had taken standard mining charges, modified the casings with reflective materials from their equipment, and created improvised stun weapons, crude but effective against our enhanced vision systems. In the confusion that followed, two more humans, Jinwoo and Soyoung, breached the armory using industrial cutting tools. Not through the main entrance, which was heavily guarded, but through the floor. They had spent hours cutting through reinforced deck plating from the level below, working in complete silence. The historian looked up from her notes, struggling to process the tactical implications. They were coordinating these attacks without military training. That's what terrified us most, Vextel admitted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. They moved like a pack, like some kind of hive mind. Each human seemed to know exactly what the others would do when they would do it, how to support each other's actions. No radio chatter, no hand signals, no visible communication at all. When Jinwoo was wounded securing the armory cot by shrapnel from his own cutting torch, he didn't retreat or call for medical assistance. Instead, he rigged the remaining mining explosives to his own body and held the position until Soyoung could distribute weapons to the other humans. He turned himself into a living barrier, daring us to advance on him. The alien's breathing grew labored as he continued. Our troops were trained for conventional warfare against organized military forces. We knew how to fight soldiers who followed doctrine, who had clear command structures, who valued their own lives above their objectives. But these humans, they fought like the station itself had come alive and decided to defend itself. The most disturbing part was that they seemed to be enjoying it. We could hear them over the communication channels, talking to each other like they were working just another shift in the mines. Yunji was giving progress reports on the ventilation system modifications. Jinwoo was joking about overtime pay while bleeding from multiple wounds. They treated our occupation like a technical problem that needed solving. Vextel's claws left deep gouges in the metal viewport frame. Then 6 hours they had turned Kepler Station into a maze of death traps and ambush points. And we were the ones trapped inside? The situation deteriorated rapidly, Vextel continued, his voice growing hoarse as the memories flooded back. The massive alien commander's breathing apparatus worked overtime, pumping additional oxygen into his system as his stress levels spiked beyond normal parameters. Within hours of the first coordinated attack, these humans had transformed their mining station from a simple civilian facility into the most deadly fortress I've ever encountered. He gestured with his primary arms, describing the layout. Kepler Station was built into a hollowed-out asteroid, 12 kilometers of tunnels, in chambers carved from solid rock. The humans had spent years learning every corridor, every maintenance shaft, every structural weakness. They knew which walls were load-bearing, which sections could be sealed off, which areas had backup power systems. To them, the station wasn't just a workplace, it was home. Quinder noticed how the commander's scarred hide had begun shifting through different colors as his emotional state fluctuated. How did they weaponize a mining facility? A human named Tae-hoon was apparently their chief engineer. Before the occupation, he had been responsible for maintaining the OR processing system's massive industrial equipment. Designed to break apart asteroids and extract valuable minerals, when the fighting started, he turned those same systems into weapons of war. Vextel's claws left deep gouges in the reinforced table as he continued. The ore crushers could generate pressures capable of pulverizing solid rock. Tae-hoon modified them to launch projectiles down the main corridors at incredible velocity. Chunks of processed metal, pieces of mining equipment, even sections of the station's own hull plating, all turned into deadly missiles. The mineral separation systems used powerful magnetic fields to sort different types of ore. He rewired them to create electromagnetic pulse weapons that could disable our combat armor and communication equipment.
Ow.
Our soldiers would enter a corridor with full tactical systems, and within seconds their entire gear would be dead weight. The historian's writing implement moved rapidly across her notepad. But surely your military training gave you advantages in direct combat. That's what we thought, Vexel replied, his 4 eyes dimming with remembered frustration. But it was their tactics that broke us. They didn't fight like any military force we'd encountered. Every doctrine we knew, every strategy in our databases, every lesson learned from centuries of galactic warfare, none of it applied to these humans. The commander stood and began pacing again, his massive footsteps echoing in the small room. A human named Yuna became their primary scout. She would deliberately expose herself to our patrols, appearing at the end of corridors just long enough to draw our fire. Our soldiers would pursue, thinking they had found an isolated target. But she was leading them into kill zones, where humans like Donghayan and Haewon waited with improvised explosives. They used themselves as bait, constantly. But here's what made it truly horrifying. They were enjoying it. I could hear them laughing over the communication channels. Yuna would report her position to the other humans like she was playing some kind of game. 3 squads following me to Junction 7, she would say, her voice bright with excitement. Donghayan, are you ready for visitors? Vexel's mandibles clicked rapidly as he recalled the audio recordings. Our psychological warfare specialists analyzed those transmissions later. They found that the humans' stress hormones were elevated, but not in patterns consistent with fear or desperation. They were experiencing what their species calls adrenaline rush. Their bodies were treating the combat situation as a form of entertainment. Entertainment? One of our intercepted communications was a human named Jamin, trapped in a sealed storage compartment with no way out. Our engineers had managed to override the door controls, thinking they had cornered him, instead of surrendering or pleading for mercy. He spent his final moments describing our tactical positions to his teammates over the radio. The aliens. Voice cracked slightly. He was dying, slowly suffocating as his oxygen ran out, but he kept talking, giving detailed reports on our troop movements, our equipment loadouts, our defensive positions. He even managed to identify the weak points in our formation. He died giving them the information they needed to outflank us. And he was laughing while he did it, actually laughing. His last words were a joke about how the storage compartment was cleaner than his old quarters. Our soldiers could hear him, through the walls, telling stories about his childhood, while our tactical advantages disappeared one by one. Vextel's breathing became labored as he continued. The worst part was when they started using our own protocols against us. A human named Sujin had somehow memorized our emergency procedures. She knew our evacuation routes, our medical protocols, our communication codes. When we tried to evacuate wounded soldiers, she would trigger false alarms throughout the station. False alarms? Fire suppression systems, radiation warnings, hull breach alerts. She could make any section of the station seem like a danger zone. Our medics would rush to evacuate casualties, only to find themselves rerouted through corridors where other humans waited with more improvised weapons. She turned our own safety procedures into death traps. The commander's scarred hide rippled with remembered rage. Sujin had been a safety inspector before the occupation. Her job was to ensure that all emergency systems functioned properly. She knew every sensor, every alarm, every automated response in the entire facility. And she used that knowledge to make us afraid of our own rescue operations. Our troops began refusing medical evacuation, afraid that the journey to safety would be more dangerous than staying wounded in combat. Morale collapsed completely when soldiers realized that the humans knew our procedures better than we did. Quinder looked up from her notes, trying to process the implications. How long did this continue? By the end of the second day, we had lost over 300 soldiers, not just dead, but also wounded, missing, or psychologically broken. Our medical facilities were overwhelmed, our communication networks were compromised, and our command structure was falling apart. Vexthal's 4 eyes focused on a point beyond the room's walls. The humans had maybe 50 people left alive by that point. 50 civilians against over 1,000 trained soldiers. But they controlled the entire station. They could move freely through areas we couldn't access, strike at targets we couldn't defend, and disappear into sections we couldn't find. That's when a human named Wu Jin made contact with our command center. He had apparently been elected. As their spokesperson, though, we never figured out how they had organized their leadership structure. His message was simple and direct. The alien's voice took on a different tone as he quoted the human's words. "Leave now, and we'll let you. Take your wounded. Stay, and we'll bring this whole station down on top of us." An ultimatum? A statement of fact, Vextal corrected. Our engineers had been monitoring the station's structural integrity throughout the fighting. The humans had been systematically weakening key support beams, redirecting power flows, and modifying the life support systems. They had turned their own home into a weapon of mass destruction. Wu Jin calmly explained that they had rigged the station's fusion reactor to overload. Not immediately, but slowly, giving us time to evacuate if we chose to accept their terms. He said they had already moved their own families to the station's most protected areas, where they could survive the initial blast and the subsequent radiation. The commander's voice dropped to a whisper. They were willing to destroy everything. They had built everything they had worked for, rather than live under occupation. And they were going to survive the explosion just long enough to make sure we didn't. Vextal, S4 compound eyes focused on the historian with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably in her chair. The bioluminescent organs behind his eyes pulsed with a strange rhythm, like warning beacons in the darkness of space. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to fill the entire room. "You want to know the most terrifying part of the entire Kepler station incident?" he asked, his massive frame leaning forward across the table. "We thought we won. After 48 hours of the most brutal urban warfare I've ever experienced, the humans eventually let us leave. They didn't pursue our retreating forces, didn't try to capture our vessels, didn't attempt to board our ships as we fled. They just ... let us go." Quinder's recording device continued its soft humming, capturing every nuance of the veteran's confession. "But you survived. You escaped with most of your fleet intact." "Escaped?" Vexel's laugh was hollow, echoing off the reinforced walls like the sound of breaking glass. "We didn't escape, historian. We were released. There's a crucial difference. That took me years to understand." The massive alien stood and moved to the room's single viewport, its reflection ghost-like in the reinforced transparent steel. Beyond the window, stars wheeled slowly in their ancient patterns, but Vextal seemed to see something else entirely in that cosmic display. "They let us leave because they wanted us to tell this story," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every single human on that station knew they were going to die. The radiation from the damaged reactor, the structural collapse they had triggered, the life support failures they had caused, there was no way for them to survive what they had done to their own home." The historian's writing implement trembled, slightly in her grip. "You're saying they sacrificed themselves deliberately? That the entire battle was planned from the beginning? Not planned exactly, but ... understood." Vextal's scarred hide rippled with colors she had never seen. Before deep purples and blues that spoke of emotions her species couldn't comprehend. During the final hours of the siege, there was a brief ceasefire. Both sides needed to tend 2 wounded and assess damage. It's when a human named Hyun Woo contacted me directly. He was one of their leaders? No, that's what made it so unsettling. Hyun Woo was just a maintenance worker, someone who repaired mining equipment and fixed broken systems. But he spoke with the authority of someone who understood exactly what was happening and why. Vexel turned from the viewport, his four eyes now glowing with an eerie intensity. He said something that haunts me to this day. "Commander, we're not trying to win this battle. We're trying to win the war that comes after." When I asked him what he meant, he explained their true strategy, which was, they knew dozens of other human colonies were scattered across this sector of the galaxy. Small settlements, mining operations, research stations, all of them defenseless against a determined military assault. The humans at Kepler Station realized that their sacrifice could protect all those other communities. The alien's claws scraped against the viewport as he continued. Haiyan-Wu told me that every action they had taken, every tactic they had used, every horror they had inflicted on us was carefully designed to send a message to the Galactic Defense Corps and every other military force in known space. What message? That attacking human civilians comes with a cost that no rational military commander would be willing to pay. They wanted us to go back to our superiors and report exactly what we had experienced. They wanted us to describe how 50 untrained miners had destroyed an entire battle group using nothing but mining equipment and absolute determination. Vexel's breathing apparatus wheezed as he struggled with the memory. Haiyan-Wu said that if word spread about what happened at Kepler Station, other military forces would think twice before attacking human settlements. He was right. Within a year, 3 different species had canceled planned operations against human colonies, citing unacceptable risk factors. The historian looked up from her notes, trying to process the implications. So the entire battle was a form of psychological warfare? More than that. It was a declaration. The humans were announcing to the galaxy that their species would not be conquered, would not be enslaved, would not be eliminated. They were willing to turn every single one of their settlements into a fortress, every civilian into a soldier, every home into a battlefield. Vexel moved away from the viewport and stood in the center of the room, his massive frame casting multiple shadows in the artificial lighting. But here's what makes it truly terrifying. They weren't bluffing. Every human military unit we've encountered has been exponentially more dangerous than those original miners. How so? They learned from Kepler Station, analyzed every tactic that worked, improved every technique that showed promise, developed new strategies based on what they discovered about themselves during that battle. The human military didn't just study our weaknesses, they studied their own strengths. The commander's voice grew stronger as he continued. Their weapons are still crude by galactic standards, but they've perfected the art of turning anything into a weapon. Their ships are still primitive, but they've learned to use that apparent weakness as an advantage. Their soldiers are still technically inferior to most galactic forces, but they fight with a coordination and determination that defies military logic. And their core nature remains the same, Vexel added, his mandibles clicking with what might have been admiration. They will sacrifice everything to protect their own, not just their immediate families or communities, but their entire species. Every human settlement we've encountered since Kepler has been prepared to follow the same strategy. Total resistance, absolute sacrifice, unacceptable cost. The alien commander moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the control panel. The humans have a saying that Haiyan-Wu shared with me during that ceasefire. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. At Kepler Station, we learned that humans will never do nothing when their people are threatened. They will fight with whatever weapons they can find. They will die to protect strangers they've never met. They will sacrifice their own lives to ensure that their enemies think twice before threatening other human communities. And they will make absolutely certain that their enemies remember the cost of underestimating human determination. Quinder watched as the scarred veteran paused at the threshold, his massive frame filling the doorway. "Commander, what happened to Kepler Station after your forces withdrew?" The reactor overloaded exactly as the humans had planned. The entire asteroid was vaporized in a fusion explosion that could be seen from 3 star systems away, long range. Sensors detected no survivors, no escape pods, no distress signals. Every human on that station died exactly as they had intended, but their message survived. Within days, every military force in the galaxy had received detailed reports of what happened at Kepler Station. Humans had turned their own deaths into the most effective propaganda campaign in galactic history. Vextel's voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. The galaxy celebrates our victory at Kepler Station in the official records. Parades are held, medals are awarded, commanders are promoted based on their participation. In that successful operation, but I know what really happened, we didn't defeat the humans. We witnessed their declaration of war against anyone who threatened their people, and that declaration has been heard across the galaxy. The humans hadn't just survived first contact with galactic civilization, they had announced their arrival as the newest apex predator, and they had done it with mining tools, unbreakable will, and the absolute certainty that some things are worth dying for. The door slid shut behind the massive alien commander, leaving Quinder alone with her recording device, and the weight of a truth that would reshape galactic politics forever. In the silence that followed, she could almost hear the echoes of human laughter from a mining station that no longer existed, and the voices of 50 miners who had changed the course of history with their final act of defiance. The humans had taught the galaxy a lesson that would not be forgotten. They were not victims to be conquered, but protectors to be feared. And they had paid for that lesson with everything they had. The end.